Hey Bill, this is David. Making this video because I thought maybe this would be an easy way to kind of explain how this report works and how it can be used. And there's been a few new fields that have been added since I think the last time we spoke. Plus, there may be some other features and things like that that were never explained, and maybe you might find useful. So here we go. Just kind of an overview. We use two main data sources to create this report. The first is FPDS, which of course is the database of record for all federal contracting activity, where you get down to the transaction line level. The other one is SAM, which is where everyone goes to register if they want to compete for federal contracts. And in here, obviously this is information that is updated every year, is required. Everything has to be notarized, the data has to be validated, etc. So there are some fields that you find in FPDS that look similar or have similar names as the ones that you find in SAM. Like the company URL, or I think there's one for POCs and things like that are in FPDS. But those fields, many of them are not mandatory, and they're not really reliable, whereas in this is something they do have to fill out, and it's, as far as I know, the most reliable source where you can find detailed information on different vendors. So just to give you an example, this company was at Technica. You've got the business start date, you've got the company URL, you've got when they registered, you've got when they need to re-register, so you get an idea of how long that information will be valid. And you've also got all the NAICS that they register with. That yes right here that you see in this particular section, that tells you that facility support services is their primary NAIC. That's what that yes means. And their product service codes have registered. And if you go down, you get to here where you could see not only the NAICS that they've registered for, but whether or not that company qualifies as a small business. So this information is pulled in, it's integrated in with all the FPDS, and that's how we come up with the report. So initially, just to give you an idea of what the process is to develop it, and how some of these fields came about. The initial pull was any contracts that had, over the past 5 years, any contracts that were 8A of some sort. They had some sort of 8A entry in type of set-aside field. Had to be of these NAICS. And then once I pull that in, I do two additional filters. One is to see whether or not the contract ends. In this particular case, I wanted contracts that were ending over the next 12 months, and that the minimum contract value, total contract value, was over $2 million. And just so you could see how that's done, this is what you're looking at here is the database in which I perform a lot of these functions. Let's just take a look just at this one here, this particular contract. Now, in FPDS, there is no contract number field. There are these two other fields that refer to it. There's the PIID, which would be the equivalent of like a task order number, and the reference IDV PIID. How I come up with this contract number is if this field is empty, if the reference IDV PIID field is empty, then the contract number will become this. However, if that field, the reference IDV PIID, does have something in it, that then becomes the contract number. Then I can roll this up to try to determine, A, does it fall? Does the latest ultimate completion date? And this, by the way, there's a couple of different fields in FPDS that contain dates. There's a completion date, there's a sign date, date signed, which I don't know what the difference is between those two. But the estimated ultimate completion date is the absolute latest with all options exercised that there could be activity on that particular contract. And then I can also, once I've got this contract number, I can roll it up and sum up both the action obligation and then this other field, base and all options value. Now, there are three values in FPDS that have dollars on them. These are the two main ones. The action obligation, of course, that is the actual dollars that are obligated against the contract vehicle. And then the base and all options value. This would be like the total value of the IDIQ. What is the ceiling on it? And if either of these two are greater than $2 million, then it would be included. If it meant, of course, the condition of ending within the next 12 months. So you can kind of get an idea of why there's a risk when you're filtering within FPDS on this, because if you said I only want contracts that are over $2 million, obviously this contract would not be included, because these individual line items are all under $2 million, and so therefore would be excluded. And if you say I only want values that are greater than $1, many times this field will have an entry with this field having zero in it. There'll be zero action obligations, but that'll be often the times where you'll see what the total base and all options are. There's a couple other fields you'll see later too that are called contract description of requirement and TO description requirement. Those are also not found in FPDS. Those are created. I have to create those, and I do that by basically combing through this stuff. I have a macro that runs through this and pulls out a lot of this. There's a lot of information in here or a lot of words and things like that are useless in terms of coming up with a title for a contract or a task order. But this field here, though, many times will have interesting information in it. Sometimes it'll have pricing information. Sometimes it'll have contact information for the contracting officer, what have you. Detailed pricing information down to FTEs and how much they're charging for those. And then another field that we create in here that is not an FPDS, we create a field called contracting officer. There is no field in FPDS called contracting officer. They have approved by, they have created by, they have signed by, modified by. Some of those fields are like modified and created by. Those are automatically generated when anybody goes in there to add a new line item or whatever. They're not necessarily contracting officers. However, the name that falls under approved by, that is the person who is authorized the contracting action. So we're calling this approved by person the contracting officer. Okay, so once I've now, so initially I pull, I make sure that I'm getting just 8A and that they're just in these NAICS. And by the way, it's the limit in FPDS is for the past 5 years. So I'm grabbing everything that's with those NAICS with A set aside for the past 5 years, pulling it in, identifying the contract number, rolling it up, and then finding, okay, is it over $2 million and is it ending sometime within the next 12 months? Now you can see here I've got one of these filter activated, and you can see that it's activated because it has that red X there. And what I'm looking at now is just from here, from this month until the end of the fiscal year. So if we're looking at all 8A contracts over $2 million that will be expiring over the next it will be expiring by the end of the fiscal year for these NAICS, this is what the total value is. And the green here, that's the total ultimate contract value or the base and all options value. And the red line here is your total obligations, the total amount of money and that has been obligated on those contracts that will be ending on these particular months. And if you summed up these total ultimate contract values it comes out to $2 billion of 8A contracts that will be ending by the end of the fiscal year. Okay. Another note about the slicers. This is set up so whatever slicer you activate in one tab will be activated throughout the other tabs. They'll cascade down. So if you filter here, then and the idea, by the way these are arranged, these tabs, is to provide kind of a drill down where you start off as kind of with a broad overview and then can drill down to look at the individual contracts and then maybe the contracts and the individual TOs against it, and then if you want to look at the contracting officers that were involved in those task orders, and also if you want to look at the vendor detail. But before we do that, there's a couple other new fields that have been added that I'm not sure. I think you may have been aware of one of them. One of them is, does the TO end after 8A expiration? So in other words, we look at the SAM data and we see, do they have an 8A expiration date, and does that 8A expiration date come before the end of the contract? So in other words, they were 8A, they were awarded the contract. By the time the contract ends, they are no longer 8A. The other, and this is new, that was added, is does the company meet the small business standard for that particular NAIC, right? So if we click on that, okay, so now we're looking at what we're seeing here is the total value of 8A contracts that will be ending by the end of this fiscal year, held by vendors that are no longer considered to be small business. And so going back to how these tabs work, the idea here is you get a broad overview of the different departments. These are the top 5 departments, top 5 agencies, top 5 contracting officers, and then if you wanted to filter on agency or a particular department or even a particular company, you can do that as well. Next tab is the contract roll-up. Again, where you can see that filter has been, these 2 filters that are applied in the first one are still applied to this. And this is that Technica, that's that company that we were looking at here. Okay, so they've got 2 main contracts that will be expiring before the end of the fiscal year, and they are no longer, Technica is no longer considered a small business for the facility support NAIC. Okay, and here we have the different names of the contracts, and you could see, like if we look at this one right here, so this one of them is and this is ending next month. For hazardous material, HMSO at Fort Bliss, Jackson, Rucker, White Sands Missile, Wainwright, and J-Bear. And you can see here, this is the total contract value. And just to show you how you can drill down even lower if you wanted to, you can, on any of the, and this is with any pivot table, if you double click on any of these calculated fields, right? So in this one has 68 line items to it. So if we double click, it opens up. You can see Excel created a new sheet for us, and now you've got all the data that was behind that particular roll-up. And in here you could now, if you wanted to look maybe at more detailed information in the description of the requirement, which is interesting. So this is terminated for convenience, and from what I understand, that sometimes is a polite term that they use, where they don't want to hammer them with a termination for cause, but they give them a termination for convenience. But you can then take a look at all the information that's behind the scenes here. So go back out to here to the contract rollup. So if you wanted to drill down further and look at the different task orders that have been placed against the contracts, you can do that. So with that contract we were just looking at before, there were 3 separate task orders, and task order descriptions here, of course, the hazmat, and then you've got another one for facility management logistics, and then maintenance supply and transportation service in Alaska. Okay. There's another field in here that people are starting to find is more and more useful, and this is the solicitation ID. This refers back to a FedBizOps solicitation ID. So if you take this and go into FedBizOps and put that into their system, now you've got access to all of the RFP information and stuff like that. And many times you could find very good information outside of FedBiz just by doing a Google on it. And you can see just by doing that, pulling up that solicitation ID, I'm getting all kinds of information here. And I actually created a folder. You'll find that in the attachment that I sent, just to show you just the type of information that's available, using the solicitation ID. For instance, this performance work statement. What is this? This is the question and answer period during the RFP process, and then actual contract award, where it's got pricing schedules and I don't know, all kinds of stuff. Many pages, 55 pages worth of it. So that is one of the other things that you might find of use. Going on to the KO information, this is, again, we're taking that approved by field, and let's go to Technica. So again, looking at this HMSO contract that's going to be ending in March. These are the contracting officers that have authorized actions on on that particular contract, the dates at which they did it, and the total amounts. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, some of these approved by fields are populated with what looks to be like a generic. It doesn't identify a particular individual. It's just identifying the KO office of that particular contracting office. Another field that was added, and this is Ryan's suggestion again, we took all the CNTS information from FPDS and then linked it back to all the different contracting offices. And the idea would be that, or the purpose of it was that, if you were looking at a particular opportunity at a particular contracting office, to see if one of our sister companies has had contacts with that particular contracting office. In this particular case, Red Wing has done business with that contracting office. I don't know if it was with these particular approved by, but with that office, Red Wing was awarded at least one contract. So that's that. And then if you wanted to then look at, and by the way, again, the filters that were applied here are also being applied here. So what you're looking at now is a list of 8A companies that have awards in one of those 3 NAICS, and they are no longer considered small business. So this, and here you could see you've got all kinds of information, if it's available, the 8A expiration date, POC information here, company URL, etc., etc. So that should conclude it. So anyways, I hope this is helpful. Hopefully maybe a little easier to do than typing all this out. and having you read it. So if you have any questions, just let me know, and talk to you soon. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later. Bye.